Welcome to the Dragon's Library, your source for games, movies, shows, and more. This might not be a surprising comment, but I love dark historical fantasy, when it's not afraid to embrace the darker topics in life. And I don't just mean the edgelord stuff, I mean actually morally complex ideas. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dragon's Library. Today I will be going over the recent addition to my literary archives, a new book by Stephen Price under the pseudonym J.M. Miro, called Ordinary Monsters. Ordinary Monsters is a wonderfully macabre work of historical fantasy set in the late Victorian era. Now, while I would usually use this as a moment to jump right into the premise, I feel the need to give a content warning. I usually don't do this, but this story does contain or reference a whole bunch of topics some people may find uncomfortable and or disturbing. There are, in no particular order, descriptions of sexual assault, abuse, torture, self-harm, and several scenes set in post-Civil War Mississippi who have, as a result, characters who are very much racist. If you do not want to hear about any of these, and I will understand, then please leave. Also, if anyone under the age of, say, 13 is listening to me, for some reason, then legally I have to tell you to leave. I know you won't, because if you found this and are listening to things about this book, then you probably don't care. And to be honest, I don't really care if you listen to me, but now no one can say I didn't give fair warning. With that out of the way, let's get to the premise. Ordinary Monster follows several adults and a handful of children with supernatural talents. Two agents, Mr. Colton and Alice Quick, are tasked to find these so-called talents and bring them to the Carindale Institute. However, a mysterious man named Jacob Marber, aided by a monster, is also hunting the children. The duo's latest assignment sends them to America to retrieve first the 16-year-old Charlie Ovid, who can heal from any injury, and then the mysterious Marlowe, who can glow with supernatural light. With Jacob Marber hot on their heels, the two agents rush to bring the children to safety, only for the group to uncover dark secrets that change everything they thought they knew. Wow, this story was really good. The initial setup brings me to mind of X-Men or Miss Peregrine's Home for Particular Children. Most likely this is intentional. I mean, the school even has its own version of Cerebro. But the execution is a lot darker than these kind of stories usually go. However, it manages a dark and graphic tone without becoming like pointless gore or just being a general downer. The characters and their motivations are well fleshed out to the point where no character feels completely evil. Even the villains have reasons for their horrific deeds, and you get the feeling that basically anyone in their position might have fallen like they did. Surprisingly, this extends even to Jacob Marber and his otherworldly ally, the Drugger. I won't say much as exploration of the unknown and seeking answers is the main plot driver, and somewhat of a theme, but suffice to say that there is more to Dr. Henry Burkcast, the head of the school, than initially appears. My main problem was the few plot lines that went unresolved, but they were mostly minor, and my research suggests this is the first part of a trilogy, so that's not really going to be an issue going forward and would likely date this review. Now, that content warning wasn't just for show, and I will be talking more in depth about those scenes in the spoiler section. But this is a very graphic book. The main gimmick of the magic system is that all the abilities are created as a result of children being born with ties to both the living world and the realm of the dead. Many of the abilities create twisted life forms, or alter the user's body. In addition, one recurring monster are the liches, undead creatures created when a specific kind of talent is unwilling to allow a soul to leave its dying body. This brings me to the characters. Marlowe is a kid who may as well be a tragedy magnet, even by the very high standards of this book. His parents were killed, then he was kidnapped to protect him from Jacob Marber, and then he was found on a trade by a desperate woman. She was fleeing the wealthy father of a man she murdered for raping her, and found the glowing baby with a corpse. After a few years of living in hiding, a resurgent in bounty hunters caused her to leave the now child Marlowe with a friend named Brent, fearing for his safety, and vanished entirely from the story. I'm guessing we're going to find more about her in the sequels, because she was so fleshed out and she had an entire POV, and it's very clear she's still alive, so. This all happens in the first few introductory chapters. He's lost at least 3 sets of parents in like 4 chapters. That has got to be some kind of record. Marlowe is pretty simple due to his age. He's only 8, 8-year-olds aren't exactly very complex characters, but at times he has an understanding of things that makes him seem a lot older, and I hope he gets more fleshing out in the sequels. Charlie Ovid is one of the other three main characters, the one whose POV we most consistently experience. He was an African-American kid who grew up with his mother in Mississippi during the late 1800s, only to be orphaned a few years before he met him. That should already tell you he's had a really shitty life, but after an accident causes a white worker to fall to his death, he gets the death sentence as a result, and is executed. 3 times. Because it turns out that Charlie Ovid can heal from any injury. It's revealed that the only things that can kill him are magical monsters and eventually old age, although even the weakest people with his talent can live till 150, so it's mostly monsters. Charlie is the more down-to-earth and suspicious of the kids. I really came to enjoy him as a protagonist. The writer gets extremely creative with his ability. This is where the self-harm warning comes in, actually. The first time we see it is when Charlie cuts his arm open in order to retrieve something he stored in his body. That's such a clever thing to do that I'm genuinely surprised we have never seen a character with advanced regeneration do something like that before. At least I haven't. If you have any examples, please leave them in the comments, email me. I'd really like to know if there's any other character who's done something like this. I mean, I know there are like robots that do stuff like this, like Bender always has that gimmick of he has like everything inside him. There's the gimmick of the character always eating things, but I don't think I've ever seen someone like having to cut themselves open to store rings or knives in their body. That's a new one. However, my other favorite character has no powers aside from being a good shot. Alice Quick is a private detective and all-around badass who recently started working for the Institute. She tries to keep herself distant after some issues with her mother, and she acts as the main adult character. Her arc is mostly centered around opening herself up after her tragic past and learning to care for others again. As we wrap up the plot, I do want to touch on the wonderful themes in Ordinary Monsters, because they deserve a lot of special mention. While there are a lot of themes about letting go, accepting others, fighting for what you believe in, and not demonizing what you don't understand, the main overarching story, to me, is about how people use good intentions to justify monstrous actions for the greater good. The title really says it all, despite the undead liches, bone crows, and otherworldly terrors. The most horrific actions are committed by those who believe they're doing something for the greater good. But they become so blinded by their prior sins that they are unwilling to stop when the cost continues to increase. Those actions, once unthinkable, become something you must count. If they stop now, then all those they killed, all that they've done, all the lives they've ruined are for nothing. This story really does embody the old adage that the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And so in the end, Ordinary Monsters' monsters are just that, ordinary. It's only when other people, those who look not at the potential good results, but the present harm, stand up and stop them, this cycle of demonization and justification can be ended. So, yeah, I really like this story a lot. I think they fleshed out the themes really well, had great characters, cool magic system. However, I do have a few issues with it. The audiobook has great production values, fantastic, with musical intros and well-done accents, but this can make it demanding to listen to. My schedule has me listening to audiobooks while doing other things, and as a result, I've regularly had to rewind for missed sections. In fact, that's one of the reasons it took so long to get through this, in addition to it being over 24 hours long. However, that isn't an issue if you're reading the ebook or a physical release and you're not on a time schedule, so I'll mostly be focusing on some other problems. In addition, the story jumps around a lot, and almost every character that is in more than 2 chapters gets at least a chapter or 2 from their POV. And then the story has a random flashback from the perspective of a new character and Jacob Marber with little to no warning, like midway through the second act or at the beginning of the second act, depending on where you cut that off. The information was important and the chapter well written, however the whole thing felt like part of the story that was kind of just stuck in somewhere because the author couldn't find a good spot for it. This makes the writing feel a little chaotic, but that's neither here or there. Wrapping this up, let me emphasize that despite these flaws, Ordinary Monsters is a fantastic world with a wonderfully macabre Victorian setting and a ghastly magic system that begs for further exploration, containing excellent characters with well thought out interactions and backstories and intentions, motivations. I would recommend this to anyone who likes the Scalamed series by Naomi Novik or enjoys historical fantasy. Dark fantasy stories, you'll also be very well suited if you like there to be, darker elements there. If you enjoy that, then Ordinary Monsters is the book for you. 9 out of 10, I highly recommend everyone who's, willing to put up with the content warning I gave, at least give it a shot. So with that out of the way, we are off script. Hello everybody and welcome back to our spoiler section. Oh, that was one of the longer scripts I've written. This lasted a whole 9 and a half minutes. Oh my gods. So I put a lot of time into writing that, mostly trying to figure out what I want to talk about here, because this is a really big story with a lot of details. I skipped over so much in that review, but, you know, it was worth it. So let's dive into what I couldn't talk about, but first up, warnings! I'm gonna probably go into more depth over, because I kind of do this a little ad-libby, I have some notes, but I'm probably going to go into more depth over some of the things I gave a content warning about. Remember that content warning? Yeah, it's about to, a lot of that stuff is about to come up again. So if you're not comfortable with that, you know, probably sign off now. I'd like it if everybody stayed, but I know some people won't. Okay, everybody here? Cool. 3, 2, 1, spoilers! You have lost all rights to complain. Okay, so let's start up with the intro. So the intro is a really interesting thing for me. It's basically an intro chapter where a woman is fleeing because they don't outright say it, but it's very clear she was raped by one of the people who runs the estate she worked at. She was like an indentured servant at the estate, and she was raped by the noble's son. However, she basically essentially killed him after he assaulted her and managed to get away. Apparently she stabbed out his eye. Of course, the father finds out almost immediately and sends guards and dogs to go hunt her down and kill her, you know, punish her, but really, she's basically just gonna die, retribution and all. I mean, he's rich and in England, in the Victorian era, nobody's gonna punish him. So, yeah. She ends up running into a train car and finds Marlowe as a baby, shining with blue light, and the woman, who actually turns out to not be dead. I warned you there are spoilers, but she essentially is written out of the story pretty soon after we find out she's not dead. The main characters just stop there for something she also took with Marlowe to protect herself. It's not important. Anyway, she ends up taking Marlowe in, and I think she loses the baby from the, you know, assault. It's unclear, it's very weird the way it's written, but I'm not really going to talk about it much, because I just don't know if there was another kid. I never heard a description of there being another baby, I don't think. I'd have to go through it all for a third time to remember that. I've already read this whole thing 2 times. So yeah, Marlowe grows up, you know, in a loving household. She really cares for the baby she found, even though she's, you know, thinks the lighting was unnatural, but she sees him as like a good omen. And she goes to care for him. However, the noble father doesn't let up, and he ends up putting out a bounty on her. She ends up staying with these, in this, like, church area, you know, getting a job, becoming friends with this lady, Brent, who eventually becomes Marlowe's, like, 3rd or 4th foster parent, depending on if you count the woman who took him into their train car and apparently didn't last more than a few hours. God, that kid is like a death magnet. I'm not even joking. Like, it's kind of a joke, but it's also kind of not, given his place in the plot. We're gonna get into Marlowe later, because there are some interesting reveals about him. I actually really like the twist about him. I see it now. I didn't actually see it coming. Not entirely. I knew he had some weird connection, because of the weird way they talk about him and his talent, but I was not quite expecting that. That one surprised me. That twist on his parentage surprised me. I will freely admit that. So, you know, she takes him in. I forget the mother's name off the top of my head right now. Sorry. I forgot to write it down too. It's hard to find, like, online stuff, and I don't want to go through the audiobook again. It's just, you know, maybe I should just go for the first 2 chapters, but I'm just so tired of the book. Like, I've listened to it twice in, like, 2 weeks, so yeah, sorry now. But she ends up taking really good care of him, but then a bounty hunter shows up, and she barely manages to escape. And Brent's like, so you have more of your past than you let on. It's like, well, you did tell me not to talk about it. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. And she's like, look, I need you to take care of Marlowe. And at first you think, oh, she's abandoning the baby. But we actually see the scene from her perspective. And she's not really talked about much by either Brent or Marlowe later on. Marlowe is like 4 when this happens, so it's not surprising. But Brent really doesn't talk about it much either. But you get her side of it. And guess what? She actually has a really good reason, because it's very likely the noble wants retribution, and Marlowe being on the run with her would just leave him wherever she gets found, you know, dead. And she obviously doesn't want that for him. She doesn't want Marlowe to end up dead. So she ends up leaving him with Brent, who was a very trusted friend who helped her hide when she needed to. She knew about the murder and everything, and she's just like, Brent, it's complicated. Brent's very understanding. It's like, I will take care of Marlo. And she leaves. She's vanished. And I really hope she comes back later on, because she was an interesting character. And she got her whole, she was the intro, like the prologue's POV was from her. She was literally the character we started this story with. The first few chapters were her. And I'm just so interested to see what happened to her after all this. Like, is she still alive? Did the nobles hunt her down? She's basically just an introductory plot device, though, in this story particularly, to get Marlo here. But she leaves him with Brent because she doesn't want him getting caught up on all this. She feels bad for dragging this innocent kid into her problems. Because yes, the guy she killed totally deserved it. But their society won't see it that way. And she's worried about what will happen to him, so she decides to leave him with a stable household. Him and Brent eventually, after the pastor that also took them in, took both her and Brent in, ends up dying. They move to America and end up working in a circus. Brent has a bunch of tattoos. Marlo's whole glow thing makes him a big attraction. And that's where they're found by the two investigators, Mr. Colton and Alice. But first, we move to Charlie Ovid. So this is where one of those content warnings come in. Because, this is 1800s Mississippi, and yes, it's very racist. Like, all the people down there, like, basically, the whole thing is that so basically Charlie Ovid, I believe, was working at the docks, I want to say, and he accidentally knocked somebody over, one of the, white workers down there, and he fell to his death. So Charlie immediately got sentenced to execution because, an accident is murder, and they even outright say it at one point. It's, you mean because he's a black kid and not a white kid? It's like, I mean, we can't say that, but, it's Mississippi, so yeah, that's what they're thinking is, yeah. Like, Alice and Colton are outright disgusted because, while America let it go on for way longer, and, the South in particular, Britain outlawed that shit a long time ago, by the time this comes up. So, Alice and Colton are like, what the fuck is wrong with this place? Which, fair. Very fair. It's 1800s, Southern America. There were a lot of things wrong with that place. And as someone who grew up in Louisiana, I can tell you that, yeah. I remember when I was little, we actually used to have to, go down. One of our field trips was down to one of those plantation houses. And as I grew up, those memories went from boredom to slight horror. So, And I'm like, wow, they took kids there? Holy shit, what the hell is wrong with our schools? So yeah. But, anyway, they tried to kill him, but, it didn't take. So they tried again. And then again. And once they realized they couldn't kill him, they essentially just locked him in a shed and told the rest of the town he's dead. He's literally only visited by the sheriff, and the sheriff is supposed to keep him near his, residence where the jail is, but his wife doesn't want him there, so they essentially locked him in a shed and barely feed him enough to keep him alive, because they're not really sure if starving him is a good idea yet. Which is just, horrific. It's just yeah, he's not even good enough for the jails. He's just in, horrid conditions. The book goes very in-depth on it. And Alice and Colton are essentially telling them, a lie. Obviously, they can't say, hey, he has supernatural powers, for bringing him to go learn stuff, because they think he's, because they're racist, and also they just assumed he intentionally murdered someone and he needs to be punished for it. And the sheriff isn't willing to let him go, so they have to sneak him out. Charlie ends up having to kill the sheriff to protect Alice and Colton. He does this by literally pulling a knife out of his skin, which is so damn cool. Seriously, I cannot emphasize how much this is an interesting idea for a regeneration character. He doesn't just heal a lot. He can heal, his body heals from any wounds, so he can actually, surgically implant stuff with his bare hands. That's just cool. That's an interesting, unique way to use that power you just don't see. The closest thing I can think of is Wolverine's claws being, sheathed in his body, and that's one of the reasons he can keep popping them out, is because, his skin just heals up. But that's, the closest thing I have. It's just a really cool idea. So the three of them end up fleeing, and Colton ends up taking Charlie to Major City, while Alice goes to retrieve Marlowe, and she ends up telling him that his adoptive father, who is apparently the guy who runs him, so the guy who ran him after his original parents died, in mysterious circumstance, they don't get to till the end of the film, he essentially adopted him, and the maid stole him to protect him from Jacob Marber, who has stormed the facility, who stormed the building. They increased the ward since then, but they've been looking for Marlowe ever since. And so they're not really lying when they say there's family for him that wants to bring him home. They're kind of lying, but not exactly. And Brent has this really, doesn't want to let him go, but it's like, Circus is like, look, we're not here to fight a legal battle, and we are not gonna shelter you if you get involved in this, because that's bad for us. Sorry, they're doing this legally. They brought the right paperwork, so Brent, please give him up. Brent does so. She ends up chasing after them, though, after Jacob Marber pays the circuit a visit and kills the circus master, so she ends up chasing after them, worried for Marlowe. She ends up dying in this fight on a train, but she ends up saving both Charlie and Marlowe so that Alice can take a shot. Alice, on the other hand, is very skeeved about, so she's new to this job, and they haven't told her a lot about this. In fact, until Charlie Ovid, she didn't even realize they were rescuing supernatural children. They just thought they were rescuing, specific children who were in dire straits. Don't ask too many questions. You'll be informed later. And she was kind of like a morally great character, but she wasn't okay with just, taking kids from their parents and all that. But it's like, well, I've done this job, and they have the paperwork. It seems on the level. But after Charlie Ovid, she starts realizing, holy shit, there's something supernatural going on here. She has a whole past where her mother became really obsessed with, supernaturals and stuff like that after she apparently saw a miracle and tried to recreate it by burning down a building because she was sure one of the kids was going to walk out carrying everyone. She ended up getting committed to a mental asylum and died. Alice actually apparently tried to go visit her when she was going to get Charlie and Marlowe because she hadn't been back to America in a few years, but she just had already died. And there's this sad moment of when she realizes her mother might have actually been onto something because she was sort of caught up in another experiment created by someone else who knew about them. It's weird, it's not important. But when she realizes that, she feels bad, that her mother just died and she didn't even know, because mental asylums weren't, the best. I mean, they literally have this whole scene where the nurse is like, well, oh, so who is your mother? It's like, oh, no, do you have her ID number? The doctor doesn't like us calling the patients by their names. Which is just this moment of, what the fuck is this doctor doing? Holy shit. Anyway, they get attacked by Jason Marber, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about him. I'm not really going to talk about the whole side plot with him in Japan and the other kid, and I'm going to go over basic details of later stuff. I'm not going to get into, the other stuff. There are too many side characters that get their own fleshing out, multiple chapter long stories, so I'm not going to go into all of that. But Jacob Marber is one of the primary antagonists. The main antagonist for most of the book, I'd say. He's basically another talent. He had the ability to manipulate dust, which he essentially can manipulate dark powder and other, small earthen materials, which he can also use to bind souls to bodies, which is how you create liches. And do a few other things. His powers got enhanced when he lost his brother before the Institute found him. There's a weird connection with these kids because their powers come from them being a nexus between life and death. And their powers they're both of the dead and of the living at the same time. And his brother, and basically every single one of them is almost always an orphan. And at bare minimum, they've lost many people who they care about, which seems to be related to their powers somewhat. So he lost his brother they were chimney sweeps after running away from the orphanage that was not nice to them at all. His brother got trapped in a chimney as they got older, and it was hard for them to do stuff. The chimney, the manager of them essentially left him to die in there and just fished his body and threw it away. And he never really got over it. So this otherworldly being from the other side, essentially called the Drugger, seduced him, convinced him to go into the other side past this, sealed gate. Basically, the school is built over a gate to the other world, the last open one. There's a guardian for it that essentially acts as a cerebro that can detect when kids are using their powers and tells the Institute to go find them. He's dying, the gateway's weakening, the Drugger is a monster from the other side that might come into the real world and bring all the spirits of the dead, causing chaos and essentially the end of the world. And Jacob Marber essentially made a deal. He went into there and tried to bring his brother back, but the Drugger tricked him, and he essentially became an aspect of it. He was bound to it, and now he works for it. However, it's revealed, and I'm getting into heavy spoiler stuff right now for the end of the plot because I'm kind of winding down my spoiler section, that he was not... It was revealed that the Drugger partially also wanted him for a few other reasons, mostly to help him open the gate. But there was the chief of the institute, Dr. Henry Burcast, was also a talent. He's lived a really long life, possibly by doing some heavily illegal things to extend his life, involving, sacrificing other people. It's implied, it's not exactly said the horrible things he's done, but I can make some guesses based on his other actions. And he's been trying to essentially regain his abilities so he can preserve himself. He's really old, like centuries, and this is where he's essentially the big theme of justifying horrible actions. So he created the school to protect the kids and study their abilities and maybe eventually regain his own. But he did indeed protect a lot of them. This is a safe place for a lot of the kids that go there. However, there are some that lose their powers, and when there are kids that lose their powers, they lose them when they come of age sometimes. It's rare, but it doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. Maybe like 1 in 10 from what we get in the book. And when it happens, apparently he makes them an offer. See, normally the school as a whole just knows that when they do that, they generally are politely kind of asked, hey, you're not really meant to be here. We have some connections down in the town over there. You can go there, get a job, live a normal life. But he apparently makes a secret offer to them saying he might be able to help them get their talent back, and he's trying to turn them into another Glyphic, which is the Guardian of the Gate. In order to do some stuff, in order to get his powers back. It's complicated, I'm not going to go into all of it. But essentially, the children usually don't turn into twisted monstrosities. They get their powers back, sure, but they essentially break and lose their mind, turn into actual monsters. And one of the people that helps him out, who practices alchemy, is given them and essentially told, just make sure they don't cause problems, which means he could, easily just tell her to kill them, but he's just not going to get his hands dirty there. But she just takes care of them because she's not a complete asshole. And she's kind of bound by certain debts that she can never really leave his service, so she just does what she can to minimize the damage. Because Henry Burcast, has been sacrificing people. She also has been sending other talents into the other world, which is very dangerous to them. He had an artifact to let them return, although a lot of them went mad or died, and one of them just never returned, and the artifact was lost. However, it was eventually revealed that she was pregnant when she went in there. But apparently that wasn't the case. People just thought that was the case. It turns out that Marlowe was actually the child of the Drugger itself. It's unclear right now, before the sequel, exactly what that means and how that all works. But Jason Marber found the dead, the other, talent who went in there on the doctor's request, and the Drugger over Charlie. She took Charlie because he was afraid of what the Drugger would do. Apparently she was trying to use him to open the gate to the other side. She was supposed to be his tool. He took him and brought him back to the real world, and the Institute took him. And so Jacob Marber was going to take him because he was afraid of what Henry Burcast would do to him. Even though he's lost a lot of himself to the Drugger, he still doesn't want her to, end the goddamn world. And she didn't even give him his brother back. He was too late. He understands that he's made he's made mistakes and done horrible things now. And he should have just killed Marber. He's like, I should have killed you, but I've already done a lot of shitty stuff. I have to make it worth it. And that's the whole thing. People doubling down on the sacrifice they've already made and making sure those sacrifices are worth it instead of just realizing that it's self-destructive. Main thing here. Henry Burcast sees himself as the greater good himself. He sees his survival as the greater good, which is really dangerous in a character. I've seen it once or twice with other immortals or really long-lived characters. They're really dangerous like that because they believe that their experience, their knowledge, he's like, I've lived centuries. I know all the mistakes you can make. I can guide the humanity to a better world, the talents and all of it. I can show you things. I know things. All that knowledge and those experiences could be lost forever if I fail. He essentially sees his survival as more important than literally anyone else's. Which is how he justifies his actions. This is the main thing of the story. It's ordinary people justifying monstrous acts. Because Henry Burcast does come across as a slightly good person. He doesn't do things just to be cruel. none of his experiments are outright things that he does to be cruel. Even when he breaks down at the end, he doesn't like automatically jump to immediately killing people. He doesn't lash out completely like that. His actions are mostly done for the task of restoring his powers, his immortality, and allowing himself to continue to live and use his experiments to guide humanity because he believes that is the greater good. He doesn't just, go around mutating children for the fun of it or like Orochimaru to figure out what'll happen. He wants a specific goal because he believes it is best for humanity in the long term. It just so happens that that goal is partially because he's an arrogant asshole who definitely sees himself as above everyone else. He's just a little less direct about it. But he does do a lot of good. There are dozens of adults and children at the Carindale Institute who were rescued from atrocious lives and conditions, and most of them, from what we understand, grow up and have normal lives. He didn't destroy lives carelessly. And even with these children he experimented on, he offered them to leave or a way to restore their powers. They might not know what they did, but he didn't entirely force it on them. Like, again, I need to make sure. He experimented on children. Yes, he most likely did not explain all the details before he, did that. And when they agreed, that mostly just locked them in at that point. He sent adult talents into the gateway in order to find something for him. He consorted with dark powers, tried to absorb the Drugger, threatened to unleash the dead living in the dead worlds, and just merged them together because he was a careless asshole at times. But his heart, at least in his mind, was in the right place. And there's even this wonderful moment because we have this other character who works for him, and she essentially acts as like the manager of the day-to-day stuff while he works on his experiments and overall and funding. She hired Mr. Colton, Alice Quick, she does all this stuff, and she's like really devoted to him. When Alice and her learn from the people and the lady who took Marlowe away when they re-find her after believing she was dead, when they find out about all this, she's horrified, yes. But she has faith in Henry Birdcast and believes, no, this man has saved dozens of children from horrific fates. He created a place where the talents could learn to control their powers and be accepted. He has saved my actions. Because of him, have saved so many lives. I have seen people go on to live happy lives. I know that he has not done, even if he did those things, he did it for the greater good, for the goal of closing the gateway, of preventing the Drugger from ever getting in, from stopping, Jacob Marber. He did what he had to do. But when she gets there, when she returns to the Carindale Institute after a lot of stuff and while it's under attack, and she finally finds him with Marlowe dying at his feet as he's using his powers to drain the Drugger to restore himself. And she looks at him and at the gateway that's fumbling around him, and then sees other people who try to stop him, like Charlie Ovid. She just can't, and it's just like, I trusted you. I believed that we were doing good things. You showed me we could do good things, and it turns out you were just using that good intention, my good intention, my belief in you, to justify your actions. And she has this amazing moment right before he kills her, or at least stabs her. She survives for a while to help Charlie Ovid, but and she's just like, I trusted you. I trusted you so much. You were a friend of my husband. You came to me after his death. You gave me a purpose again. Helped me see that I could do good in this world. And she did. She was morally questionable as a character, but her motives were clearly for the greater good. And she's kind of one of the characters that essentially realizes how that her actions, she did questionable things, slightly illegal things, but she was always to help the children. And in the end, she had lines she wouldn't cross, This was a line she couldn't cross. And she didn't downplay what she did. When she did something illegal, it was always something. She didn't try and say, well, that wasn't important. It's no, it was important. Yes, it was a horrible thing to do, but it was the only choice. We did it. We will accept consequences for it, but I will always be happy that those children are alive as a result. And you really get this feel of her that she was willing to do anything so long as it wasn't worse than the alternative. And you get the feeling with Jacob Marber and Henry Burkast that they didn't have those lines. As they committed horrible actions, those horrible actions became the norm. And the next thing was justified by all the horrible things they had already done. Like, if I've already killed 20 people, and now I've realized that I'm gonna have to kill 40 more in order to save 100, well, I might as well kill the 40 people. I've already killed, like, 20, you know? If I stop now, then I'm just a murderer. I'm not somebody who saved lives. I haven't saved 60 more lives. I haven't saved 60 more lives than I've killed. I've just killed 20 people. It's that justification, especially with Jacob Marber, that it really hits you. Because even after we learn about him, he's so consumed with killing Burkast that he's perfectly willing to assault the Carindale Institute, nearly unleash the Drucker, turn his former comrades, Walter and Mr. Colton, into liches. And Mr. Colton is fully under his control, but after he dies, he's so horrified by the things Jacob made him do that he begs Alice to freaking end him. And Alice can't do it. She actually holds the gun to his chest, and he actually wraps his hands around it, preventing her from pulling away, and pulls the trigger himself because he's so horrified by what Jacob made him do. He killed dozens of people under Jacob's control as a lich, and he's just horrified of it. Walter, one of Jacob's friends who really, really trusted and loved him, and even betrayed the Institute before he became a lich because he trusted Jacob that much, was twisted into a monster by Jacob. And Jacob believes that, yes, he's done horrible things, but he was partially the fault of Henry Burkast and the Drucker, and he's unwilling to respect responsibility for it, or realize that it wasn't, his actions were not justified. They were not right. Even when he did things wrong and is willing to admit they were wrong or horrible, he still talks about them. Like, when he talks about the children he fed to the Drucker to allow it to sup their power down so it could grow strong enough to come here, we got a scene with him in his head being like, well, at least it was better than Burkast's experiments. Like, he justifies the action to himself. He's unwilling, unlike, Henry Burkast's second in command, he's unwilling to reconcile that what he did was bad. Like, that it doesn't matter if there was a worse fate, he still crossed a line, and that has to be admitted. Now, it's been almost 40 minutes, so I'm going to start wrapping down here. I will say, the ending is really good. Not that. In the end, we have Marlowe walking into the other world to seal it off from the inside with Brent's help. She meets him there and is, like, helping guide him as a ghost. We have Charlie Ovid, who's really come to see Marlowe as a second family, watching his, essentially the only family he's known since his mother died, walk into the other side. Meanwhile, Alice Quick gathers two of the other, children we get to know more, and also their classmates, and she essentially takes them and escapes the facility. A lot of kids died. We actually see Alice, like, as Alice is escaping, she sees bodies around the halls, and some of them are very small, and she just has to keep looking, keep running. So the children and her, she manages to defeat Jacob Marber, and they all, essentially, they're running away as the facility burns behind them. That's literally how it ends. Just like Charlie watches Marlowe walk away. Next two chapters, we have Alice trying to get the children out, and then Alice, watches Jacob Marber be dragged off to the edge. I'm not going to talk about the monster that killed him, the way she was controlling it, her relationship with it. Essentially, Alice is essentially the one willing to do tough decisions, but she's unwilling to cross the line. She's willing to do the right thing when it needs to be done. I really do want to go into that, but I don't want to go on too long, so I'm going to leave that for you to discover. Let's just say Alice Quick had a really cool thing with this monster, the Kirask. I'm not getting too much into it. But yeah, Jacob Marber just is dragged to his death, and then Alice turns to the children, grabs them all up, and says, "We gotta run." And then it's like, "And the fires burn behind them." And that's it. Cold cut. Show's over. Really interesting way. I thought it was a little abrupt when I was reading it. I'm like, I guess some people like the ambiguous ending, and then I heard there's gonna be a trilogy, and I'm like, oh, that figures. Okay, I can see it now. I see it. It's a trilogy. We're gonna see more from Charlie. We're gonna see more from Alice Quick and the other talents, the young ones. We're gonna see more from Marlowe on the other side. It's gonna be interesting. Gonna have fun with it. I'm actually really looking forward to this sequel. The world is just so captivating. I can't I've said all I can say about it. I said this in the review. I've had like 30 minutes of spoiler section now. So, as next time, bye. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and thank you for listening to the Dragon's Library. Please subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes. The Dragon's Library releases new episodes Tuesday and Friday each week, and you can follow us on Twitter at dragon_library2. If you want to suggest an episode topic, my email is in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for all your support.